Good afternoon. Want to welcome our colleagues at the school board. Glad to see all you here today. Court's on its way, and I think Mr. Gessert said he had another obligation. So, President Williams, will you begin?
Would be happy to. Thank you for having us this afternoon. We're here this afternoon to share with you the superintendent's recommended budget for fiscal year 2021. Later this afternoon or this evening at our business meeting, the board will be considering the adoption of the superintendent's recommended budget as the board's draft budget. So I'll turn things over to Dr. Michael.
Okay. Thank you, President Williams. County Commissioners, as Ms. Melissa said, we're here today to share what is my draft budget to the board. The board certainly has the right and obligation to change the budget as they see fit as we move through the process, but we want to be sure that we got before the County Commissioners as early in the process as possible to seek your support. Before we begin the budget presentation, I have a number of staff members here that can help support with the budget presentation. We had a video we shared at the last board meeting, and I'd like to share that at this time.
I need my book.
Shared reading between parents and children is one of the best ways to help young learners succeed in their education. For this student and his mother, it's a multilingual experience. James, now in kindergarten at Hickory Elementary, completed the pre-K program last year. Starting school was a little unnerving, not just for a 4-year-old who speaks Spanish, but for mom and dad too.
When James first enrolled in pre-K, he was nervous and hesitant. His English skills were just beginning. Mom was very concerned about James enjoying his day at pre-K.
But those feelings softened once his parents saw him growing socially, academically, emotionally.
Al principio no lo queríamos mandar a James, pero luego después de la emoción, la experiencia que vimos con él, nos motivó a que él siga yendo más a la escuela.
Nos sorprendía con cada cosa de que él nos decía, que él sabía a veces cosas de que nosotros ni nos imaginábamos y wow, cómo sabe tanto y apenas está en pre-K.
In addition to the traditional milestones achieved in pre-K, James made impressive improvements in another area, language.
Sí, el inglés de él evolucionó bastante.
In pre-K, James participated in English learner activities while staying engaged in the classroom with his peers. Now in kindergarten, he no longer needs English learner services.
James became friends with both the children that spoke Spanish and the children that spoke no Spanish at all. And slowly, James spoke more and more English. By the end of the year, James was one of the top readers in the class and is showing huge success in kindergarten.
It's a similar story across the school system. Looking at students who speak a language other than English, about 83% of those students who completed pre-K with WCPS no longer needed English learner services this year in kindergarten. And the growth of the pre-K program is fueling that success, as pre-K has expanded to a full day at each elementary school in the county. More students are exiting English learner services by kindergarten.
The children come in speaking more than one language or a little English. By January, February, they are speaking English with their peers. They've learned the routines of the classroom, they're participating, they're raising their hands to volunteer, they are speaking English. And then little by little they grow in that social language and the academic language that they're going to need to be successful in kindergarten.
Growing in language and their education. Now, after seeing James's accomplishments in school, it will soon be time for little brother Jake to take his turn in pre-K.
Muchas personas no quieren mandar a su hijo a pre-K porque dicen no va a aprender. Y sí, aprenden mucho.
So we intend to use that video to help promote our pre-K. It was really turned out to be an unintended consequence, and I wanted to share that really as part of our budgeting process. A big part of our effort over the last couple of years has been to expand pre-K as we've seen the needs of our children not being ready for kindergarten based on the circumstances of life or whatever brings them to school at 5 years old, they just weren't prepared to be in kindergarten. So we've addressed that, or tried to address that over the last couple of years. Kind of a positive, unintended consequence of that is this English language learner piece, where many of our non-English speaking community members and their children are non-English speaking come to school and they don't speak any English at all. What we've discovered in pre-K, because children pick up those language skills so quickly, our pre-K has allowed us to reduce the number of potential students that would be in English language learner services as a result of our pre-K. So another bonus of our pre-K program has been not only that it's helped prepare children in kindergarten and including their non-English speakers, but it's also helped our non-English speakers learn to speak English and not be identified for English language learner services. So I thought that related to the budget in a very positive way. It's been a great outcome. At this point, the county doesn't have a significant amount of money invested in pre-K, but the state, we have picked up over $5 million in the last 2 years based on a new formula from the state for pre-K, but you had to have all-day pre-K. In Washington County, we are the 5th highest number, not percentage of students in pre-K, all-day pre-K, but the 5th highest in the state of Maryland of students that have pre-K services. So we're also receiving the 5th highest amount of money for our pre-K initiative.
Boyd, that money you received for being the 5th highest, that has nothing to do with like a maintenance effort? So if you're
Nothing to
the
do with maintenance of effort. It's a block grant, so it's not part of any formula for what you're required to give or from the state perspective.
And then how long does that grant? Does it last for 50 years, 20
It
years?
will roll up into the Kerwin funding, and as long as Kerwin makes the pre-K initiative a priority, we'll see how the funding formulates in that, but I'm anticipating it would do nothing but go up. I don't think it would go down. So the state has given partial funding for each one of the pre-K students, and I say at this point, it's brought $5 million in additional dollars to Washington County in just the last 2.5 years. So just a little quick review of how our revenue works. Come ahead here a slide. So the state had a 1.2% increase in the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and that relates to the entire funding formula, transportation, special ed, the foundation formula. So our team is generally pretty good at predicting what we anticipate receiving from the state. We knew the 1.2% was out there. What we didn't know was, in Washington County, we received a higher, this year we've been identified as a county that we have a higher wealth per student than the state average. So in Washington County this past year, the wealth per student went up over 5%. The wealth across the state was about 3.5%. So I can't begin to explain it, but in this strange formula of the 1.2%, we ended up in Washington County getting less than 1.2% this year. So our calculation of state aid is going to be off a little bit. The reason the state does it that way, I believe, is because they anticipate that those counties that have wealth above, per student wealth above the rest of the state, have the ability to help support local, with local education dollars. From a state perspective, the state's required to give us maintenance of effort on 38 students. And just based on their new formula, we picked up 249 additional pre-K students this year in September, and that's part of that $5 million I just discussed. The state also has a formula for English language learners. We've had more than 45 English language learners this year, but at the time that they counted English language learners, the official count was 45 full-day students. So we picked up a little additional revenue there. Our farm rate, it's disappointing to me that while it's part of the funding formula, we went from 47 to 47.8% in farm rate this year. So that's free and reduced meal rates. With our low unemployment, I know the county commissioners were proud of the low unemployment rate and should be. I think it was 3.5% at the time the video was made this morning that was shared. It's disappointing to me that our farm rate continues to increase. You would think probably one of the lowest unemployment rates in Washington County, maybe in a long, long time. We would see a lower, much lower farm rate, or at least a decline in the farm rate. And at this point, we continue to increase in farm rate. So we're hovering around 50%. So that's of concern to me at this point.
Dr. Michael, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are those statistics from like the same fiscal year? Because it's interesting, if our wealth per student has increased, farm rate has also increased. Are they looking at the same fiscal year? Is there a lag in that calculation anywhere?
I don't think so. I mean, it might be by like a half a year because you submit your income eligible information in September before the end. I think it's 30 days after the school year starts, so it probably falls in October sometimes. But that information is fairly current of what your current status is. I can't speak for the wealth, how much that trails or what that is. Your county staff might know more about that than I do. But it doesn't trail substantially, but it's not how much students, it's just they take all your students divided into how much the wealth of your county's gone up. So I don't know if that's income tax or real estate tax, but somehow
Maybe that wealth increase isn't necessarily for families with children. Maybe it's
it would not necessarily, no, it is not wealth per household. It's not that type of wealth. It's just the wealth, the overall wealth of the county's increased. Divide that overall wealth of the county by the number of students you have, and you get a per student amount of wealth. That's how it's calculated. How the amount of wealth is determined, I don't know. But I'm sure your staff's probably pretty familiar with that. But they did compare that to all the other counties in the state. We do know the state average was a little over 3.5%. We do know the average for Washington County was over 5%. So it's a good thing for Washington County that our wealth per students has gone up. It's also a sign that there's available resources potentially to support education, in my opinion. So what we received in state money so far, and I don't anticipate it changing. I know there's a lot of people that think Kerwin's yet to come in and kick in here for July 1st. We haven't seen the bill drop. I understand it's somewhere between 100 and 150 pages at this point. They anticipate it's going to drop this week. So I'm anxious to read that cover to cover, whatever that turns out to be. But the money for Kerwin won't start until next July 1st. So I think the money that we receive from the state is going to be pretty close to the money that we're going to receive from the state. We'd estimated this number to be about $4 million. At this point, it's $1.66 million. $1.66 million. So that is a real challenge to us that we receive that much less from the state than we anticipated. We do hope that this number will go up about $900,000. I don't think the state has correctly calculated our farm rate increase. Made an appeal directly to Dr. Salmon. She's assured me that they have sent information on over to the governor's office, and we're hoping to pick up $900,000 in the governor's supplemental budget. If we do, we'll reduce our request to the county by $900,000. In addition to unrestricted funds, we did get a restricted grant of $1.2 million, a little bit over $1.2 million. This will go to the five of our Title I schools. It has a lot of restrictions, requires a full-time RN, requires a full-time person to coordinate wraparound services. It can't be used, it's limited for what it can be used for. It's also not the way that the legislative body intended for this money to be used last year. So we could see that the Senate and the House could change how this $1.2 million would be used. Right now, the 1.2 is not reflected in this budget and cannot be used for the things that I've identified in the operating budget. So how this affects the county would have the 38 students that they'd have to pick up on their local side for local maintenance of effort. We also were going to receive money from the county based on the additional maintenance of effort for low effort counties. Unfortunately, this is the fourth year in a row we've been identified as that. So we look at our anticipated revenues, 1.66 from the state. Again, that could go up as much as 900,000. Our request to you locally is 7.82, and again, that could go down 900,000, be a little bit under 7 million. We have some additional revenue sources, primarily from tuition income. So overall, this budget increases 9.58%. We've identified 5 different areas that we'll look at expenditures, and I'll go through those quickly with you. So from a health and safety standpoint, we've had to add 2 teachers in mid-year here. Recently for kindergarten class size, we had kindergarten starting to approach 30 students in a kindergarten class. We need to address that with at least 1 teacher. We had another situation where we're starting to get to 26, 27, so we've had to add a teacher. I've also added some additional temporary teachers to get us through the rest of this year that won't roll over in the budget, but I'm hoping to roll these 2 elementary teachers over in the budget. They may or may not be at the school that they're currently at. We've had increased clerical staff to handle House Bill 486, which was passed last legislative session. It's a good bill in the sense that we're checking everybody out for any type of child abuse or anything in their past, but it's a huge amount of paperwork. It's really delayed the hiring process. It's very labor intensive, so we've had to add some clerical support to help with that. During this year, we've added 9 bus attendants, primarily for our city schools. We're having some issues, 35, 55 students on a bus. Even though sometimes it's a short ride, for a safety feature, we have to add additional resources to support the bus driver who's responsible for driving the 40-foot bus through the city of Hagerstown and while they're watching students. We've had 3 individual students with health concerns as we've looked that we believe new to this year, and we've looked forward, and those students and other students are going to continue, so we're going to have to continue support for those students with health assistance. As we look at our growth, our high school flattened out a little bit, but it's going to continue to grow in the coming years. Middle school's really where we're seeing the bubble right now. That bottom blue number is our middle school growing. It's going to continue to grow for a couple years. Unless we have in-migration, people moving into the community, it should flatten out, and then we're going to shift teachers from middle school to high school. But our real concern right now is we're trailing the needs in middle school. We should have added 6 or 7 teachers last year. We were not able to do that based on the budget, and we have class sizes well over 30 in a number of our academic classes. So I want to be able to address that in this budget. So as we look at our growing needs, we want to add an assistant principal at Ruth Ann Monroe Elementary School. We want to add 2 assistant principals, one at Northern Middle School, one at Springfield, to address the growing needs of the students there and the growing population. We want to add 7 secondary teachers. 6 of those will be at middle school, 1 will be at the high school level. Last year, through the Kerwin Initiative or the Maryland Blueprint money, we were able to initiate 10 additional social workers and counselors, a combination of those. I wanted to continue this. I had 10 in this year. I had to cut it down to 2 to make the budget reasonable. I heard a lot of positive comments from teachers, parents, students about the addition of the social workers and the counselors last year. We're struggling with meeting the needs of students that have speech needs. We're also struggling to fill our speech pathologists roles, and our caseloads for them are almost double what they're supposed to be according to some standards. So we're trying to add 3 speech language pathologists. Additionally, the growing needs in our English language learner population, which at one time was in a half a dozen schools in our county, is now scattered across, I think, 28 or 9 schools. You can see the numbers have grown from around 400 in 2016 to up over 600 at this point. And I think if it had not been for our PreK initiative, I think you would see another 100+ students on this list as well. So we need to add 2 English language learners teachers to address those needs. We've had kind of a new phenomenon here in Washington County. Our 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds have come with behavior that we just have not seen in Washington County ever. This is my 41st year. I've not always worked with elementary, but I've always heard about elementary schools and teachers, and some of our board members represent elementary teachers. I don't know if it's opioid addiction. I don't know if it's whatever the population that's growing in Washington County. We welcome all of our students. We're willing to teach all of our students, but we need to address behaviors, again, that we just have not seen before. After the state of the county, this morning I visited an elementary school, entered a PreK class. Young lady had just joined the class in recent weeks, and I mean, she was just out of control, just yelling, screaming, non-compliant. The substitute teacher was able to get her out into the hallway. She threw herself down on the floor, just screaming at the top of her lungs. I went up the hallway and closed a couple doors. I didn't know what their protocol was, so I just kind of stood there till the principal could get there. But this is the nature of what we're seeing that we have not seen before in our past, not with this 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old. This entire slide is about dealing with our elementary student behaviors. So our plan is to add 7 special needs teachers. This would be programs that may or may not be for special education students. We would target these teachers going into our Title I schools to create a K-2 and a 3-5 behavior class. The behavior class might be for students to be there for a day or 2, almost like an in-school suspension type situation. It could be for students that are there for short periods of time, a week, a month. It could be for students that are there all year but are pushed in and out of classes as their behaviors permit. To support the teacher, each teacher would have 2 parapros that would be assigned to the class. They would move in and out of the class with the students if they're pushed out. If they remain in the class, they remain in the classroom to support the classroom. Also, there'd be a registered behavior technician assigned to each of the schools that work with the entire student body and with all the teachers on student behaviors. Each program, so it'd be at 5 different schools, each program would have a counselor or social worker, more than likely a social worker, depending upon the needs of the school, and there would be 1 BCBA that would support the entire program. This whole slide is, again, just to address the behavior needs of our students. It's to address the citizens of Washington County and the needs of them. They just happen to be very young. And it also helps support the other students in the classroom as these children will be worked with in and out of the classroom to help avoid disruptions to the other children in the classroom. So this is a very important initiative that we have here this year. Also for growth, we have 5 contingency teachers. We just continue to be challenged. Our county, as far as enrollment, I think is going to kind of level off over time unless we have in-migration, new housing or something. What I see is the outlying areas, our county schools are declining in enrollment. And unfortunately, what happens in that is they don't decline enough that we can pick up a teacher and move the teacher to where we have increased enrollment. They decline to the point that we have really small classes, or we can't support it with a staff member and we have really large classes. So it's really difficult to staff some of our smaller schools. It's hard to tell what to do with that until after school starts. The children actually show up, so that's how we use the contingency positions. The 3 custodians are to help us with the additional space of the new UIP building and Sharpsburg Elementary. We have a substantial amount of increase in square footage that will need to be cleaned. Some other mandatory increases that in the past we normally haven't itemized and we have just eaten in the budget and moved it from other areas. But we feel the need to start picking up these costs. Some of them are fairly small. A little bit in middle college program, nursing services, about $187,000 based on the raises that Meredith has given and the services that they're providing. Again, the background checks that we talked about with the clerical staff, that's also, there's costs involved with each one of those background checks that we do. We have to accommodate employees that have, disabilities, might be, with sight, vision, chairs, things like that. So there's a need to support that. Software programs have continued to increase in cost, and this budget reflects the cost for those things, as well as phone and internet, about $50,000 increase in costs in phone and internet. Medical supplies, we were able to get EpiPens for free for a number of years. At this point, it's about $20,000 a year we need to pick up in those types of supplies, and then just other contractual services. Some other needs we have, there's been a lot of discussion at the state level on equity, and our board's currently working on their equity policy. We had about a $300,000 line item for equity training. We've reduced that at this point to $95,000, again, trying to make the request as minimum as possible. We do have a number of gaps we see in achievement, academic achievement, student attendance achievement, suspension issues when you look at various race and various categories identified by the state. And we want to address those, the majority of which has to be addressed directly by teachers. Cybersecurity software, we have $300,000 in the budget for cybersecurity software. We had an audit done a couple years ago after we had to fire at CES and we lost some data. In that audit, it was recommended that we hire 5 additional technology employees. We have not been able to do that in our budget, but we have been able to add 3. One of those individuals, TJ, is our cybersecurity person. They're identifying this $300,000 as an absolute must that we must have to protect student information and protect staff information. So I need to support that in the budget. As we've expanded technology in past years with classroom projectors, specifically this time it's teacher MacBooks, but it could be student iPads, student other types of devices, there has not been a plan to have a long-term sustainable plan to replace those items, and this would begin to address that, the additional money that we put in the budget here. For compensation, like the county commissioners, we've looked at the minimum wage requirements, and we're just going to continue to inch up the very bottom of our scale. We're still working with our unions, but this plan does not reflect any type of up through the whole scale change. It just reflects dealing with the lowest salary grades that are needed to increase to meet the minimum wage. Salary resource pool and benefits are included in this section, as well as healthcare costs.
At $5.76 million, is that all new cost, or is that only added to what?
That would be incremental increase in cost for all wages across administrators, teachers, and ESP employees. You have to remember, Washington County has over 3,000 employees. So I can assure you this number does not reflect a very large increase in salary, even though it's a large number. We're a $300 million budget, 85% of that is people. That answer the question, Commissioner?
I thought it was just for the minimum wage employees.
Oh, no. Minimum wage, Jeff, one of the team members would have that. It's not an insignificant number, but it's not a large number this year. It will be as we get up towards $15 an hour over the next number of years. But again, our plan is we're just pushing the very bottom of the scale. We're not pushing up through the scale. It's not our plan at this point.
I think we kind of agreed a couple weeks ago on a similar plan for our staff, the situation that we have. We're in the same boat when it comes to the minimum wage. Can you get for us, I don't expect you to have it now, either like a hard number or percentage of how many employees would be affected by that minimum wage?
I don't know, Jeff, Eric, anybody have any idea?
Primarily our food service workers, but I don't have an exact.
I don't need it now, that's fine.
Right.
It's curiosity.
Okay, in order to reduce cost, one thing we're doing right now is we're going to close Funkstown, the Early Childhood Center at Funkstown. The immediate costs we pick up there, we kind of reduce them and add them back in the budget, different places, but we'll eliminate a coordinator position, we'll eliminate 2 custodial positions, lead teacher role there, clerical position there. I mean, there's other incidental costs of we'll have minimum heating, cooling, trash services won't be needed. Daily delivery of our what's called the pony, comes from our central office won't be needed. There'll be a lot of cost savings there, but it's not reflected in this. We also did as we did the last 2 years that I've been superintendent. Went through the budget line by line by line. A lot of it we transferred money around, but a lot of it ended up being reductions as well. So this total category is a reduction of $2.1 million. We spent hours and hours and hours going through, changing something from $3,000 to $2,900 and changing something from $2,900 to $3,000 because of an increase or something. So we've been through every line of our budget and can fully justify each thing. So we switch from the operating budget to the capital budget. That blue category down the middle of the screen, the $6.5 million, has already been approved by the state. So the IEC has already approved, guaranteed, we're going to get additional $6.5 million in capital support. You can see the projects that are fully funded. When you go across the columns, if the IEC accepts the staff's recommendation, the 90% recommendation, that's the 5th column over, and the 100% recommendation, the 6th column over, you can see our total for this year is going to be about $7.5 million, which is what we anticipate will happen. That's even without the passage of House Bill 1. If House Bill 1 passes, I don't know if that money's affected this year or future years, it would go up substantially. But right now, with the 7.5 from the state, we would need about 6.7 to match that here locally in order to accept all that money. I think the long-term CIP, I know this year's CIP is not out, but the long-term CIP from the past is reflecting about $4 million in funding for the locals. So we need additional funding to accept the $7.5 million from the state. And with that, we'd be glad to take questions from the county commissioners. I think the thing that I find interesting in our budget, and I think I'm willing to commit to, is that we will continue to outperform based on how hard our staff works. Credit all to them. But we are 20th in per student allotment in the state of Maryland, yet our academic achievement consistently, so we're in the bottom quartile or lower than the bottom quartile by the time you get to 20th out of 24 jurisdictions per student allotment, yet we achieve in the top half, sometimes in the top quartile of almost every academic achievement number. So a lot of credit to staff. They work hard. Again, we accept every child that comes through the door. They're our children. We want to educate them. We have no hesitation about that. But we definitely have increasing needs over the last number of years. Our demographics are changing here in Washington County. It's not that they're good or bad, but they're more challenging from the standpoint of educating children. And we need additional resources in order to be able to do that. 2 years ago, when I came before the county commissioners, I thought we made a good argument of increase in enrollment, increase in English language speakers, challenges with some of the behavior of the students, increases in special education needs, and unfortunately, we were not funded much different than we had been in the past. That continues to be the pattern. I just, in all sincerity, we have a different population that we are educating, and we need additional support. Much like EMS needs support because of increased challenges that they've had, the police department needs increased support because of the challenges they've had. I would hope that you would look at education the same way. I've been in 2 presentations now from the new CEO Emeritus. I'd encourage you to have him make a presentation to you. In that presentation, he's talking about community health. And his prediction is, research is, the greatest thing that you can do to community health is to have a strong economy. And the driver to economy, in his illustration, is education. So I think the more we invest in education, regardless of our circumstances, but based particularly right now because of our circumstances, we can help you drive a stronger economy, which will drive a stronger health for our community, not only economic health, but also physical health, mental health for our community. Thank you.
Commissioners, any comments? School board, any comments?
Do you have any questions or comments for us? Yes? No?
Hearing no questions, thank you for the presentation. We shall meet again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything else? Adjournment, motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.